from my grandma in a little town out west in southern Manitoba. And I was an only child, of course, so I was spoiled. And I used to get, the thing is, I think I started, my memory starts, I remember when I was a real little kid, I told a lie to my mother, and that's my first memory. I got a spanking. I told a lie. I'd done something, I can't remember what it was I did or that was done, but I came in and they said, it was out in our back garage. I'd made a mess or broke a window or something out there. And when I came in, they said, how did that happen? Because we used to play out in the garage behind our house. All the kids, we played house out there, and we had little cupboards, and we had a great time in this empty garage that was at the back. And there were some storm windows kept there, and one of the windows got broken. And my dad was a little upset. And I said, Harvey Bailey did it. Harvey Bailey was the boy that lived next door. That was, maybe a year or so older than me, but not very much, because he used to come over and play with the girls and boys over there, too. And I didn't like him much, but I said Harvey Bailey did it. And he went over and told Mrs. Bailey, gave Mrs. Bailey heck because Harvey had broken this window. And he hadn't done it. I had. And Dad found out about that, and I happened to be having a bath. We used to have our baths in the kitchen in those days. It was a big old house, and you didn't have a bathtub upstairs or anything. You'd bath in a tub, hot water. And it was a bad time. I was having a bath, and my mother was drying me off. I don't know how old I'd be, maybe 5. She was drying me off when Dad came in and told her what had happened, that I had told a little bit of a lie. And I got a spanking across the bare behind, and I remember that one. But I deserved it. And I had to go over and tell Harvey Bailey how sorry I was. That was worse than the spanking almost, I think that was one of my first memories. But we used to play out in the back in this garage. And all the kids in the neighborhood, we'd make mud pies and have a great time, play house out there. Just had a great time. And the other place that we used to play was right across the road where my grandma lived. And all the kids in the neighborhood there would come over, and we'd put on shows. And Grandma, at the side of her house, there was a big lawn at the side of her house with a bench to sit on in the sunshine and so on, and vines up the side of the veranda. And Grandma used to sit there. I thought she was old, but she wasn't as old as I am now. Anyway, she used to sit there occasionally and knit and so on in the nice days. But when she wasn't out there and my cousins were around, we used to put on shows. We thought we were so darn smart. We'd put on shows for the rest of the neighborhood. And we'd ask all the kids to come over and watch the shows. And sometimes we'd include a couple of the girls or boys that were pretty good. Bob McLean, he grew up to be a minister, by the way, but he used to be awfully good. He could play the piano like everything when he was young, and he was an actor. He used to like to act. So we used to include him sometimes. But when my cousins would come in from the farm to visit Grandma, we'd put on a play. And we'd have to make it up, of course, before, and then we'd run around and give invitations to the McLeans and the Sinklers and the Temples and the Shepherds and everybody to come over and watch the play. And they liked to do this because they had a lot of fun booing and clapping and, yeah. And they'd sit in rows like you do in a show and watch us put on this play out at the side, out this big lawn. We thought we were awfully smart. But there were all cousins that did it. Mm-hmm. Except for Bob. And Bob was such an actor that we had to include him. He was very good. And then this was a very small town, Waskata. It's still there. And there aren't as many people living in it there now as there were then. Mm-hmm. In the wintertime, there were 2 big ditches, one in front of that ran along. They were drains for the area. And one ran along in front of my grandma's house and one across the road in front of our house. It ran along that whole street along there. And in order to get across these ditches, I can remember my dad used to put a big board across those ditches so we could run across them. Of course, that got to be a game, too. And then at Grandma's, it was a drier ditch, and you could run down in it and up the other side. And that got to be a game. But the traffic was nil across that road, so you didn't have to worry about traffic or anything. If it was a horse and buggy or a horse and a sled, or once in a while a Ford that went put, 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 put down down the road. So we used to have a good time, and in the wintertime, those ditches would fill with water and freeze. The water would freeze. And we had a curling rink in Waskata. That was the chief activity in the wintertime for the seniors, curling and skating for the kids in a big rink. And it was, I can tell you another story about that, but these ditches would freeze over, and we'd get tin cans and fill them with ice and freeze them, and we'd pretend we were curling. And we'd draw things on the ice, and we'd curl out there. We'd have curling games. The kids would. And that was kind of fun. You threw the big, somebody'd hold a broom, and you'd throw the big tin. They were tobacco tins or coffee tins that you got things in those days. Usually tobacco tins. They floated the best down the ice. Anyway, and we'd have games. Now, that'd be the neighborhood kids choose teams, and yeah. Mm-hmm. And then we'd go down and watch the curling, the big guys curl down at the rink. And they would curl certain days on, there had two rinks on one on either side of this big arena thing. By big, it wasn't that big, but there were two rinks in it, one on one side of it and one on the other. And then the center ice, I thought was big. Used to be for skating, and they'd skate sometimes some afternoons, not every afternoon, but always 7 to 9, and Saturday afternoon, of course. And I remember getting a pair of skates, and I don't know how old I'd be, 7 maybe, for Christmas, and learning to skate in front of everybody down on that ice. Oh my. And there was an older fella, and the thing is, ages are kind of funny when you're a little kid. This older fella, I guess he was late high school. Grant Milhausen. Anyway, he could, and there was another one too. Anyway, he could skate like you wouldn't believe. And he had, the other thing we had, I'm getting all mixed up here, because we had boarders at our house too. In those days, in the 1930s, it was getting pretty hard to make a living, because we had, I can get into this too, dust storms and grasshoppers that ate the wheat and so on, and the farmers were having a terrible time. And with the result that the people that had stores in town were having a terrible time too, because people didn't have money to spend. And our doctor in that town used to be paid by people bringing in food. Like they couldn't pay him for delivering a baby or for coming out to see somebody that had pneumonia or whatever, and they'd bring in like a chicken or vegetables in the fall for him and so on for the doctor, because they couldn't pay him, but that's what he would live on during. And the same with the minister in our church. Couldn't pay him cash. He'd get a little weeny bit maybe, but they lived on the goods of the area for their services. For doctors or for the minister, the church people would bring in some of the fall harvest and so on to them, and the minister would store it away in his big barn at the back. I remember him too, and keep it from freezing, like carrots and cabbages and turnips and things like this. And that's what they had to live on. They didn't have money to buy anything. And in the fall, we always got an Eaton's catalog. Oh my goodness sakes, that was the entertainment. Couldn't afford books, but you looked at the Eaton's catalog and dreamed of what you might get. All these dolls and cars and horses and toy things, trains, little wind-up trains and things. Oh, goodness, yeah. But I got off the subject. I got my skates in this Grant Milhausen, who was the son of the butcher and was a nice-looking fella. I would think he'd be in his teens. He probably was going to he'd be going to high school a little later, and he used to take my cousin out a bit. Anyway, we'd go skating down there, and I had the biggest crush on this guy. Oh, he was so cute-looking, and I was about 7 or 8, and I thought he was wonderful. And he'd skate with me. Oh, he taught me to skate. He held me up, and I'm sure it was a pain in the neck for him. He'd take me around, and I'd be there every time he was there. I was handy. And he'd take me around 2 laps, and then he'd say, now you try yourself. And he'd say, now take a little longer strides now, Lorraine, try this. And he really did a good job of trying to teach me, but I would go by myself, and I'd go a couple of strides, and then bang, I'd be hanging on to the side of the rink. But I finally got, so I thought I was so smart. Now, there was another one, a Griffith boy, who was about the same age as Grant, and I think they got a charge out of teaching this little kid how to skate, and they knew I had a crush on them. So if I went out, Clayton Griffith would always be sure to asked me for a skate too, and they were good skaters, and they held me up all the way around I thought I was so smart when I skated with them. But they knew my mom and dad pretty well, so they were being very kind. And then my mother used to curl, and I'd go down and watch her curl down on some afternoons if I was free. On a Saturday afternoon I did. I went to a little school, a country school really. It was in Waskedo. As far as I was concerned, it was a town school. It was good. And I went, it was only about 3 houses away from us, so I could leave the house in the morning and run and be there on time and get up at 5 to 9 pretty nearly. And I remember I always had a crush on somebody. There was a guy by the name of Frank Ings that I thought was handsome, and I was in about grade 1, and he'd be about grade 3. And in those days, you had, and in a little town like that, you had from 1 to 5, grade 5, were all in the one room, and then it skipped to another room with 5 to 8, and then high school was in the back end of that school, and they were the seniors. Well, Frank would be in about, I was in grade 1, and he'd be in about, and his brother was with me, Jim Ings, and he would be about grade 3 or 4. And I thought he was wonderful. And he must have thought I was all right because he'd walk home with me. He and Jim, on their way out to their farm, they walked home to the farm. It was out a little piece, but they'd walk home. In the wintertime, they'd get a sleigh ride in, but that was... But anyway, he gave me a ring that he made, a beaded ring. It was beautiful, and I took it home. I slept with it under my pillow, for goodness sakes. And finally, my mother found it and said, "Where did you get this? Now you give that right back to Frank." It was a good ring, and she wasn't sure where he got it, But it was made of beads. It looked like it might have been made by the Indians around the area or something. It was very pretty. I had to give it back to Frank Ings. My mother made me give it back. My first ring, engagement ring. Dear. Anyway, we used to have a lot of fun in the schoolyard playing and horsing around. I also had a crush on this Bob McLean, who was turned into be a minister, who was an actor and used to come over to our place. And his sister was my best friend, Jean. And I'd be over at their place, and they'd be over at my place, and it was good. We had a good bunch of kids. Margaret Diker, she was the minister's daughter. Bubs. Oh, there was another Lorraine, believe it or not. In that little weeny town, there was another Lorraine Sinkler, and we called her Bubbles. So she didn't get Lorraine very much. And she had 2 brothers that were Bill and Jack. Jack was younger. Jack was the age of my cousin Murray. And Murray and Jean used to come in from the farm in the wintertime and live in town, but they lived on the farm out a piece from Waskedo in the summertime. And they'd go to the town's school in the wintertime, and then they'd move out to a place called Hernfield, which was just a little school, and take the rest of their training out there. But I remember distinctly a real good memory was when Jean was born. That's what I was telling you about before. Jeannie, my aunt, had lost 2 or 3 babies, and I kind of knew this, but I didn't understand the goings-on, really, except that I knew that Aunt Ruby, who was my very favorite aunt, other than Aunt Jenny, of course, at that time was very sick, and everybody was terribly concerned about her, and I wasn't sure why or anything, but she was pregnant, and she was due to have the baby any time, and she'd lost 2 or 3 after Murray, and everybody was concerned about her and terribly worried. And so about April, around the 1st of April, she was in the hospital for a while, and on my birthday, April the 7th, I wakened up and it was my birthday. And my mother came in and said, "Guess what? Aunt Ruby has a baby girl and everything's fine." I thought that baby girl was a birthday present to me because I loved Aunt Ruby and she was fine and everything. I ran across the road to tell Grandma. Of course, Grandma knew, but really by that time, but I went all over that little town telling about Aunt Ruby had a baby girl. And I was 7. I remember distinctly I was 7. And she had this baby girl for my birthday. That was so that was kind of fun. Then my as I said, everything got very hard up. Everybody was very hard up about that time. And my dad had this pool room and barber shop, and things weren't going very well. And we had a couple of boarders in our house too. We had Duke Friesen, who was a barber, and Les Spear, who was a teacher, and they boarded at our place. And Les, he was a Romeo. He took every girl in the area out. Duke was a bachelor. He didn't take many people out. He was kind of a sober kind of a fella. And he worked for my dad, as a matter of fact. But they boarded at our place. And Les was a school teacher and could just walk down the street to the school. He taught high school. Anyway, and then across at my grandma's, she had a boarder called Pat McIver. And Pat was there for years and years and years and ran the general store. And he was an Irishman, and he was a nice fella. He was an old fella too. Anyway, Mom and Dad. I don't know when it was. I guess it was when Dad went. Everybody was going broke. They were having a terrible time with these dust storms. Oh, I can tell you something about that too. The first dust storm that I ever saw, we were coming home from school. Jean McLean and Bubs and I and a couple of others, walking home just that short distance from school, and we were seeing how far we could walk with our eyes shut. There was no danger of traffic in that little town at all. So we were walking along the sidewalk and the road, and I was peeking a little bit, but we were walking to see how far we could go with our eyes shut. And I walked along for just a little piece with my eyes shut tight and thought, I'm doing pretty well here. I didn't run off the side of the sidewalk or anything. And I opened my eyes and I couldn't see anything. Everything was black with dust, just blowing. And the kids were behind me, and they ran across the road, and they went home. It was very short to there. They went home. I went in, and I couldn't get over it. The dust, and it lasted for ages. The dust was so thick it would be like in a desert and after that dust storm was over, there were great piles of dust, hills of it, like snow, in our backyard, and our whole, and it sifted through the windows onto the windowsills inside. It was an awful mess. And then that kept up that summer, and it blew all the seed that the farmers had away, and so they didn't have any crop. It was just dreadful, and the cattle had nothing to eat because it was hot and dry and dusty, and so everybody went broke. It was just a terrible, terrible summer, and they had to bring stuff in to southern Manitoba from Ontario for people to eat because we didn't have any crops or anything, and big train loads of stuff came from southern Ontario where all the vegetables and so on were grown, and my dad had come from Ontario, so he knew some of the vegetables we'd never even heard of. vegetable marrow. We'd never heard of vegetable marrow, but there was some. Anyway, there was this big train load came to Waskata in southern Manitoba, and in order to make sure that it was something like you see in Africa now, that it was all given out evenly. They had 2 or 3 of the town people go down, and they had mounted policemen down there so that people weren't grabbing things, and they gave them out to families. And Dad was chosen as one of the men to unload and distribute some of the stuff. And nobody wanted the vegetable. They didn't know about a vegetable marrow, but he had to tell them how to cook it. So he was giving them to the people and saying, "This is how you bake it." And anyway, they'd never seen it, but he took some because he'd eaten them and he knew they were good. And we had to have some too because we didn't have anything. And we had turnip and carrots and vegetables and vegetable marrow and squash and things like that would keep, and potatoes. Given out, and you had to store them in someplace cold for the winter because and you had to be careful. You had to kind of dole them out at each meal because they had to last you a long time. I remember that winter. Well, I think that was the fall, and maybe we went through that winter. I can't remember for sure. We went through that winter all right, and then the next summer wasn't much better, and my dad decided that he had to leave. He had to close up the shop. And he had to come to Ontario where his relatives, his brothers and sisters lived, and see if he couldn't get reestablished. Well, he didn't have that much training in anything. And so my mother had been a school teacher, but she wasn't able to work particularly, but she was very musical. And she had a dance band around southern Manitoba, and she led it. She played the piano, and my Uncle Dick was on a banjo, and it was a darn good band. And they used to go, when things were good, they used to go to opening of barns, and have barn dances and so on. And they were always the band that was hired and so on. And Mom used to direct. She was musical, and she used to direct, I forgot to tell you this, all the Christmas pageants and everything that were in the town hall at Christmas time in Waskata. She did all the directing, really, and the playing. And she used to play for movies. Now, that was before just when I was a little wee kid. I'd stayed with my grandma while she played for the movies. They were silent movies, and just with the printing underneath them. And then the music was sent along with the movie, and she'd get the music ahead of time, and then she could run over it, and then she had to watch the movie and play the music at the same time, and she was pretty good. But she got to see all these shows for nothing. I thought that was great, but anyway, one time, the little theater that they had, this was when things were not too bad, of course, this is before the dust storms, the little theater that there was in town, Mr. Baker owned that theater, and one time Mother was playing for the show, and there was a coal gas, heated by coal, coal gas leak came in the furnace, and people were starting to feel sick in the show, and they'd walk out of the show and they'd just twirl around and sit down on the sidewalk. They'd faint or do something, because they were being poisoned by this coal gas, or this gas that came up. I think it was coal gas. Now, I'm not sure. It was a gas of some kind, and something went wrong with the furnace anyway, and I can't imagine that it was anything else but coal gas, because we didn't have much else in those days. Anyway, my mother sat on that piano bench and played the piano. She wasn't sure what she was playing until she fell off it. And they carried her out, but they were scared to death that she was really, really overcome by it. But she came around. She was all right. But she was doing her job. Anyway, my dad decided in this next year that he should come east and see if he could get established. So he left us. I can remember crying. I didn't know when I'd see my dad again. And he came east, and Mom and I went up to my Aunt Jenny's, one of her sisters, in Regina. And I had spent, Lorna, I didn't get to that either. When we were kids, we spent every summer holidays together. And we spent summer holidays up at Aunt Jenny's. I was about 10 or 11 by this time. And we had spent summer holidays up at Regina. And Ruthie, one of my other cousins, had gone up with us one year but she got homesick, so she never went up again. But Lorna and I went. We knew a good thing when we had it, because Aunt Jen used to send us to shows and across to the park with lunches, and we had a great time for 2 or 3 weeks up at Regina when we went there. And out at Regina Beach. Oh, yes. Anyway, so Mother and I were to go to Aunt Jenny and Uncle Sam's and live there for the winter while Dad seemed to get established down here, and down here in Ontario. And I went to Davin School, and Aunt Jenny gave me dancing lessons. I'd had dancing lessons the summer before. I could tap dance, and when the band, the orchestra that Mother played at a new barn, which my Uncle Victor had one time, they'd always have a little intermission where they had some entertainment, and I was asked to tap dance at a couple of them. So nobody could tap dance around there, so I was a little girl that could tap dance. Anyway, so Aunt Jenny insisted on me having more lessons, tapping lessons, so I was in several recitals and so on while I was there. And I understand that and I'd like to find her, my dancing teacher, Nancy Graham, lives in Toronto right now. She must be 90 years old, but she lives there anyway. I'd like to find. Anyway, we went up and we lived for that right from the fall, that Christmas, and up until the following Christmas with Aunt Jenny and Uncle Sam. And I went to the school behind Aunt Jen's, Davin School. And I went to grade 6, yeah. And then Dad sent for us before Christmas that next year. And so Mom and I came down to Toronto at that time. He was working in Toronto, but he had a chance of coming to London. And we came down. Oh, I was so glad to see my dad again. I hated to leave out there, though, all my friends. But we came here, and let's see, it was Christmas. We spent some time with my dad's sister, Aunt Eva, just a day or so there, and then we came up to London to where Dad's brother was, Uncle Harry and Aunt Ella, and they took us in for over Christmas. They lived in an apartment, and we went in over Christmas with them, and then we got a line on a room and a kitchen up in the very wealthiest part of London, which was hard to go to school there when you didn't have anything. Anyway, we lived there for maybe 2 months or 3 months, and then Dad took over the house. He got a job, and he was able to rent the whole house, and he rented the front half of it out to somebody to make it ends meet for us, and we lived in the back half of it. And then he remodeled it so that it was a duplex. It was a cottage, but it was an apartment at the back and an apartment at the front. And then the following September, he got a chance to borrow some money and buy a house, and he did, over on Grosvenor Street. And that's where we lived until I was married. But anyway, I went to Ryerson School, which was a very wealthy-oriented school in London. I don't know how I managed that, but I did. But everybody was very kind anyway, and I had good friends there, and I didn't realize that we weren't really very well off. It was fine with me, whatever. My grandma used to come down and visit us, and Aunt Jenny used to come down and visit us, and I went out there to visit her, and yes, we had a great time. Yeah, no, let me think. And,
your pimple story? Your pimple story? You told Jeff and I that.
Oh, let me think.
The Christmas and your uncle was that you went to visit Aunt Jenny, I think it was for Christmas, and you had to sleep over at.
Oh, yes. Oh, I forgot that. There was we weren't. That was when we were staying with Aunt Jenny. During the time we stayed with Aunt Jenny, that first Christmas that my dad was away. Yeah, the first Christmas that my dad left in the fall, and we went up to stay with Aunt Jen, and I was going to school there. And Grandma always had Christmas, and Grandma had 6 kids, and all the kids came home with all the kids. And so we had to go home for Christmas to Grandma's. And we drove home, and Uncle Sam drove, and it was an old car. It probably wasn't old in those days, but anyway, we left early in the morning in order to be down Christmas Eve at Grandma's Stalker's. and we were all packed up, and we got into a snowstorm. Is that the one you mean? We were into a terrible snowstorm, just about 30 miles from Wascata, maybe 30 or 40 miles. In those days, it took a long time to go 40 miles, not like today. Anyway, we got in this blinding snowstorm, and Uncle Sam couldn't see where he was going. I think he ran off the road or something, got stuck anyway in the snowstorm in a bank at the side. And so the three of us, Aunt Jenny and Mother and I, were in the car, and we didn't know, it was cold, and we weren't sure what we were going to do because it was blinding blizzard and nobody was out in it. But Uncle Sam knew we were close to Pipestone, and he thought he could see a light across the field. So he decided he would walk across the field. And when he left, I'm sure that Aunt Jen and Mother, and I guess I did too, thought we'd never see him again. He'd just never get there. Oh, anyway, he left. That was the only thing he could do. He left and he walked across the field to Pipestone. And we sat in the car all bundled up. We got in the back seat together and put all our rugs on, and we thought, well, unless a sleigh comes along, we're here, you know. Yes. Anyway, I had developed a boil. I know. Well, did I get to the part where he disappeared? Yeah. And we got in the back seat, and we were very, very cold. But we bundled up there, and we heard the jingle of the bells coming. And our prayers were sure answered, because we were praying that Uncle Sam would make it. I figured maybe it was the last time I'd see Uncle Sam. I didn't know. Anyway, along came a sleigh, a big sleigh with a couple of teams on it, and they took us in to Pipestone. That was quite an interesting ride. But I had this boil on my lip. That's what Jenny wanted. It was on my upper lip here, and it was very sore. And I don't know whether it was there or when I got to Grandma's. I think that was when I put the compress on it. Anyway, it was bothering me pretty badly. I'd never had one of these before, but I was 12, and I guess that's the age that you get these things. Anyway, we went to Pipestone, and we got up. They said, we've got one room left upstairs. I don't know whether it was one or two. I think Mother and I were in one, and I think Aunt Jenny and Uncle Sam the other. I can't remember for sure which one. It was cold up there, though. But I tell you, we were so glad to be in someplace. I had a hot thing of soup, and we were thankful. Anyway, the next day we got up, and it wasn't too bad, and we could head off. And they pulled the car out of the snowbank it was in, and we could head for Grandma's. And I think it was at Grandma's that I put the hot compress on. Grandma said, I know just the thing to do for that, you see. Put a hot compress on this boil, and I did that, and it hurt like heck. But it squirted. It burst, and the thing squirted out. Oh, boy. It just went out. Full of, guck it was. Anyway, and I kept putting this hot, and it got better. But, oh, boy, that was a sore lip I had. Couldn't talk much that day. That was hard on me. Anyway, but it was Christmas morning when we got there, and Grandma was certainly relieved because she was worried. We called from Pipestone, and I can't remember whether we could get. Yeah, we got through to Grandma's to tell her that where we were, because they were terribly worried. We were so late getting there, and we had a lovely Christmas, except I had a terribly sore lip. I felt as though somebody punched me in the mouth the whole weekend. But that was a dangerous trip. It was something But I think I was 12. Yeah, No, I wasn't quite. I was going to be 12 in April when that happened, because we came to London when I was 12. I guess that was it. Yeah, and of course the schools out west were ahead of the schools here, and so I was in grade 6, and they put me wham up to grade 7 here when I got here, and I took a half a year in grade 7 and was in grade 8 then at Ryerson School. I thought that was great. I didn't mind going ahead here. But Manitoba schools were ahead, and I knew that. They said, oh, you've taken this, and you've taken that. And I have, oh, yeah, I have. But anyway, it worked out very well. Now, when we were in Regina, I got into some recitals there, dance recitals, and I remember the first singing I ever did on stage was for in front of a whole class of Nancy Graham's kids. So we were doing a tap dance, a recital at the Roxy Theater, and we did a song called "We're Gonna Have Smooth Sailing, smooth, smooth sailing, like a ship at sea, we'll merrily roll along." And I don't know whether it was I don't think it was a Shirley Temple, but it was one of those. Maybe it was Eleanor Powell or some of the tap dance. Anyway, Nancy had the whole group do a tap dance to that, but she wanted somebody to sing out in front to begin with. And I was the one that was chosen, and I never was so nervous in all my life. I was only a little kid, but I sang into the microphone, "Smooth Sailing," and then it was really, really arty. Then the kids all came tap dancing out in sailor outfits, and I backed up into the line with them and did the dance too, Oh, big deal. Anyway, yeah, and that was Nancy Graham's recital, and we did. Aunt Jenny, of course, was she was a character. She spoiled me rotten, but everybody that came in for a dinner or anything at her place, and she entertained a lot, I'd have to do this bit, the smooth sailing bit, and the tap dance, and the whole bit. I got kind of Anyway, then when we came down here, I didn't take any dancing or anything until I got into London Life. And then I got into the troupe shows. Yeah. But it was all that stuff background that did that. But my mom was the one that was very musical and kept me singing and doing things. Uh-huh. Okay. Met Stu. You want me to go on from there? No. Scarlet fever? Oh, when I was little out west, I must have been, I just started to school in Waskata. It must have been about the first Christmas. I'd be about 7. And I got scarlet fever. I was very ill with scarlet fever. And my bedroom was up at the front, just off the front of the house. And I could lie in bed. My bed was in front of the window, and I could lie in bed and look out the window, which was great because I had to be in bed I was in bed for a month, I think, with scarlet fever. And it was right around Christmas time, and I missed all the Christmas concert. My mother was out directing plays and doing the singing stuff and everything, and I was missing it all. Oh, I felt terrible. And I had a couple of babysitters, Jean Stevenson, teenagers that lived up the street, and they used to sit with me sometimes. But with scarlet fever, they couldn't because it was very contagious. My dad sat with me when my mother was out getting she was always directing the concerts. Anyway, on the night of the Christmas concert, Santa Claus always used to come at the end of the Christmas concert, of course, to the town hall and give out little presents. And bags of candy this year it was, and we were lucky to get that because things weren't very good. And and Les Spear being the school teacher, I used to hear what went on there, but the boarders had to stay very clear of my room too because scarlet fever was very contagious. Anyway, I didn't see anybody for a while, and neither did Mother and Dad. Well, Mother did, but she had to watch it. She was out playing for the thing. It's a wonder everybody didn't get it. But anyway, I was lying in bed the night of the concert at about 8 o'clock, and I heard jingle bells go ringing by my window. They had to come from that area, any of the sleighs. And I thought it was Santa Claus, and I cried, and I said to Dad, "There goes Santa Claus now," and I wasn't there. Gosh, it was awful. Anyway, the sleigh bells came from a distance, dingle, 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 and they went by, dingle, 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 and I knew it was Santa Claus going to the concert. I know I felt terrible. So that was a terrible time to have scarlet fever. Anyway. Was the leader, and Dick, her brother, played the banjo, and Duke Friesen, who was the barber that lived at our house, boarded our house, he played a saxophone. Oh, a mean saxophone. I used to love to hear Duke. And there was a guy by the name of Ovie Young who played the mandolin, and there was an old guy, he wasn't so old maybe, by the name of Bill Strange, who played a mean fiddle, and who played Clayton Griffith played the drums. and I liked the drums and the saxophone and the banjo very much. Anyway, they used to practice in our front room, in our living room, where there was a piano, and that I liked. I'd go to bed with them practicing downstairs, the new pieces like Red Sails in the Sunset, and let's see, what was the one that came in? Red Sails in the Sunset was one of the first ones I remember brand new coming in that they practiced down there. I'd have to think about it for some of the rest of them, but these new sheets of music would come in every once in a while to Mother, and then they'd have to practice in the front room, and I'd go to bed with them practicing. It was great. Okay, Duke was a very good sax player, and Les Spear, the school teacher who did everything, he played the saxophone too, but he couldn't hit the notes like Duke. Sometimes he'd hit some sour ones, but anyway, I don't know where he is now.